For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to The Gist on StratNews Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale. On The Gist this evening, we are going to focus on the Indian Coast Guard and its journey for the last 46 or 47 years since its inception, its role, its functions, its responsibility. And joining me to discuss about the Indian Coast Guard and its progress is Vijay Chafekar, a former Additional Director General of the Force, who was in service till recently and now focuses on writing as well as commenting about strategic issues. Welcome to this program, Vijay, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nitin. Pleasure and honor talking to you on StratNews Global.
Let me start with the most obvious question. Coast Guard has been in existence for over 46 years now, and it's of course now expanded from its origins, the small beginning of this force in 1978. But we need to know a little more about the Coast Guard. So if you can give a brief overview of what Coast Guard is and how it was formed, why it is now an important part of India's national security grid. If you can tell us a little bit about the force itself.
Yeah, having joined Coast Guard in the formative years and having witnessed initial struggles, remember Coast Guard made the beginning with two old naval frigates, Kuthar and Krupan. And yes, there was also there are two Fokker Friendship F-27 aircrafts on lease from Indian Airlines. So at that time, we rejoiced on little achievements of the Coast Guard. But then soon, long-term Coast Guard perspective plans were made. Coast Guard was progressively strengthened. And as of date, I can say that Coast Guard is transformed into a professional maritime force. And this can be judged from the scale of achievements of the Coast Guard. If you allow me, I can elaborate on a few of that.
Please do that.
Well, initial years when I joined, early 80s, we had this poaching or fishing by foreign fishing vessels happening not just in territorial waters but close to our shores. And this activity by foreign fishing vessels was not by the neighboring maritime states but also from Myanmar, Thailand, and vessels came from as far as Philippines, Thailand, and Korea. So Coast Guard got after apprehending these vessels, and progressively huge number of vessels were caught, and this poaching activity or illegal fishing was curbed. And as of date, we can say there is no poaching by foreign fishing vessels, but we have reached this stage after about 1,600 foreign fishing vessels, and which were manned by about 13,500 foreign crew. So all these people were arrested, they were subject to the process of law and thereafter repatriated. So that is how we contain this poaching activity. But then during 80s, you would have heard about the silver and gold smuggling, and Coast Guard had huge success in anti-smuggling operations. And in late 80s, at one point of time, the total value of catch, that silver and gold catches Coast Guard had, that nearly exceeded the investment in Coast Guard. So you can understand kind of success we had at that time.
This is mostly on the West Seaboard,
on the West Coast.
Yes.
And then later, major challenge was about piracy. You have heard about the Alondra Rainbow case, Japanese merchant vessel which was taken over by pirates and rescued by recovered by Coast Guard. It in fact gave Coast Guard international fame. And then again in 2010-11, there were reports of piracy taking place in Lakshadweep waters. So Coast Guard foiled most of those piracy incidents and apprehended many Somali pirates. And since then, in the last 11-12 years, there has not been any piracy case reported in Indian waters. But then again, the drug trafficking, anti-drug trafficking operations, there have been series of them. In the recent past, almost every month we hear some Coast Guard operation normally off Gujarat coast or in Lakshadweep water. Also, they are taking place in coordination with Sri Lanka and Maldives. And till date, the value of those drug catches exceeds something like 10,000 crores. So I'm sure all these operations have had phenomenal success, and which is in addition to safety of life and property. There is assistance provided to merchant ship, fishermen, cyclone relief, and till the last count, I believe some 11,000 lives were saved out at sea. So that is the scale of Coast Guard
So
operations.
vast spectrum of activities that Coast Guard does. But
Yes.
there is confusion amongst common Indian citizens that there is the Indian Navy and there is also the Coast Guard. So how do they function? How do they coordinate? What are there overlapping, conflicting functions that they have? So if you can clarify that, what is the mandate for the Coast Guard, Indian Coast Guard? What does it have to do? What is its jurisdiction up to? I think that will help clarify some of these, some of the confusion that is there in the minds of the people.
Yes, I think question is why Coast Guard? It may sound very basic question in the 47th year, but it's very relevant because the way Coast Guard job is perceived, that is, Coast Guard means to guard the coast. So people think probably Coast Guard job will be along the coast or on the coast. Another thing is Coast Guard means Navy, or Coast Guard is part of Navy. Now, reason that this kind of perception exists is that people find it very difficult to comprehend as to what could be that unique, specific charter that Government of India thought it necessary to create another maritime force. Now, to understand this, we have to look at the events of 1960s and 70s, and I would say
Sure.
that Coast Guard owes its existence to those events of 60s and 70s. Now, what was happening? In 60s, oil exploration activity started in the Bombay High, and those activities were happening about 100 to 150 kilometers from the coastline. Now, as of that date, by Government of India notification of 1956, India's territorial waters extended only up to 6 nautical miles. That is about 10 kilometers. Whereas this oil exploration activity was happening about 100 to 150 kilometers. So what happened next was, through 15th Constitution Amendment, Government of India promulgated its jurisdiction on the resources of seabed and continental shelf, seaward from our coastline, and no outer limit was specified. So that is how the oil exploration activity in the Bombay High was given legal backing, but it was happening around the world. And then coastal states were making claim over the ocean resources, territorial claims, and there were conflicting claims. In this backdrop, United Nations sponsored what is called a Law of Sea Conference with a mandate to develop a comprehensive legal framework. Now, this legal framework later became Law of Sea Convention, but even before that, in 1976, Government of India enacted Maritime Zones of India Act, proclaiming India's exclusive economic jurisdiction in the maritime zones. And this maritime zones extended 200 nautical miles from the coastline and also around the islands, and in total measuring over 2 million square kilometers.
Right.
Now, here we are in a situation where we have huge national interest, economic interest in this vast ocean space. So we have made a claim over this of jurisdiction. It is one thing to claim jurisdiction, another thing to enforce it. So the requirement was protect these resources, maritime resources, prevent poaching of these resources, facilitate sustainable exploitation of these resources by our fishermen, by our oil exploration activity, and then protect shipping, safe and maritime trade. Now, all these activities were essentially about maritime law enforcement, very different from what Navy does, maritime defense, warfare, power projection. So obviously, Government of India thought it necessary that we need another agency to carry out these functions, and thus Indian Coast Guard was constituted on 1st Feb 1977, followed by Coast Guard Act in 1978, which very clearly said what Coast Guard is supposed to do, that is, to protect India's national interest in the maritime zones and ensure EEZ security. So it was a very distinct, clear charter for which Coast Guard was created.
Right. So its jurisdiction extends from the shore to about what, the territorial waters, or it goes beyond?
200 nautical miles, which is about
200 nautical miles.
360 kilometers into sea.
Right. So, having done that, and then having got a clear mandate, and you have already explained how Coast Guard has contributed to defense of India in many ways, preventing smuggling, preventing poaching, preventing even drug trafficking. But as we see in the 21st century, we've had the Mumbai attack, for instance, in 2008, a seaborne terrorist attack, which then created again a lot of bad blood between different agencies, between government agencies, and also there was blame game everywhere. Since then, the Coast Guard has actually expanded, if I can use the word exponentially, to my memory, after 2008. And you were, I'm sure, part of that expansion as a middle level and then senior level officer in the Coast Guard. So, how has Coast Guard now got not just an additional manpower, additional resources, but has also expanded its activities? If you can, elaborate on that a little bit.
I think the growth of Coast Guard, which happened with a proper perspective plan and to fulfill the requirement of the Coast Guard Charter, the statutory function given in the Coast Guard Act. But I would see there are two phases. One is pre-2008 and then post-2008. So Coast Guard definitely started acquisition of ships of different class, offshore patrol vessels, fast patrol vessels, hovercrafts to reach shallow waters, and the aircraft, Dorniers for the surveillance, and the carry out surveillance, and the helicopters. So this force structure was already available and was being developed exactly to support the statutory function and charter. Of course, things changed post 2008. And as I mentioned, all those accomplishments and achievements of Coast Guard, they become secondary the moment we talk about what happened in 2008 Mumbai attack. But to understand that, and there's a legitimate question, why did it happen, how did it happen, and what are we doing about it, that it doesn't happen again. So we have to look at the maritime domain and challenges of maritime security. And first of all is that we have 7,516 kilometers coastline, then territorial waters, 12 miles into sea, and beyond that, this EEZ of 2 million square kilometers. So all this area has to be kept under surveillance at all times. Besides this, we are endowed with a maritime geography by virtue of which we have huge or major shipping routes and major east-west shipping traffic which passes through or in the vicinity of our waters. What it means is that at any given time, there are thousands of merchant vessels which transit through our EEZ. And add to this, we have something like 3.5 lakh fishing boats registered in India, and we take a conservative estimate of say 30% of them, that is about 100,000 fishing boats out at sea at any given time. So that is how dense is the maritime domain. So the task is to detect threat from this kind of dense and vast maritime environment. Now, certain things happen post 2611. There is about at policy front, there is a demarcation of responsibilities, delineation of responsibility between various agencies. Navy is overall in charge of maritime security. There are joint operations room. There are joint SOPs. There are joint exercises. And Coast Guard is additionally made specifically responsible for security in territorial waters. But then for Coast Guard, coastal security is not coastal because you'll understand that threat rarely originates in the territorial waters. It has to transit through high seas and EEZ to reach territorial waters. So
Sure.
of course, the responsibility is for territorial waters, but most of the Coast Guard effort, I wouldn't say most, a very large portion of it is focused in the EEZ. In any case, Coast Guard operations are guided by dual objective. That is, one, definitely to deter the threats inimical to our national security, but at the same time, reassure the legitimate users of the sea, that is, to help our fishermen to exploit fish or carry out fishing activity or the oil exploration activity or maritime transport. So we have to protect that. So these two things. But coming to the deterrence, how to deter the forces enemy. As I said, there is a challenge about detecting the threat from the dense maritime domain. What is one thing which has changed in the last 12 years is we have now chain of static sensors along the coastline, which is chain of radars, which can detect boats or fishing boat at certain distance. But then they can detect for physical identification, again, aerial surveillance or surveillance by physical investigation by ships or aircraft is required. Now, how it is done, how we can deter is one of the ways carry out frequent boarding operations and take the probability of detection so high that possibly nobody will attempt another attack like that or try the similar way, but it is not going to happen on the same way. There are a variety of ways in which
Sure.
adversary can think, and we also think about it, and this possibility are simulated.
Cat and mouse game.
Yes, so that goes on. But see, security situation may be dynamic, but what is constant and is the requirement to keep that entire EEZ and territorial water under surveillance at all times, both through electronic medium and visual medium for threat detection. Now, this part is done by having a chain of radars and frequent boarding. But one of the things to create deterrence is not just physical boarding, but also carry out radio telephony investigation, which is done by Coast Guard ships and aircraft, frequently questioning the ships and boat transiting through our EEZ. Now, sometimes it becomes kind of harassment for merchant ships. They feel, oh, just now one Coast Guard ship called, another is calling, an aircraft is also calling, asking same information. So there is kind of clutter on radio telephony network. But it helps because it helps to amplify our presence. The Coast Guard is there everywhere. And in fact, this is one area where Coast Guard working is totally different from that of Navy. Or I would rather say it is opposite the way Navy works. Okay. Navy is required to be silent and invisible, whereas visibility is key to our operations. We have to be more and more visible so that we succeed in what we want to do. So,
absolutely. Because it's law enforcement. Your role is, in this case, is law enforcement.
Law enforcement and to be visible, both whom you are reassuring for our own legitimate users and deterrence for both purposes. Visibility.
I get the point. Yes.
So that is how the things are addressed. As far as you mentioned about the force level change, yes, there has been huge capability development plans which have been supported by Government of India, and I must say, thankful that government has been very kind in providing budgetary support. That is how Coast Guard assets, like if talk about the aircrafts, we had almost 2.5 times increase in the net surveillance capabilities. We have this ALH, we have heard about 16 of those ALH added to the Coast Guard inventory. And this was a long overdue demand for twin engine helicopters, a very important role that play. And coming to the ships, there are larger ships, medium-sized ships, and smaller boats and hovercrafts. So the specialized hovercrafts, they are covering the shallow waters, which the ships, because of their draft restriction, cannot reach. And then also we have, important thing I think I missed out. What was it? It is not just numbers which are gone to 160 from about 65, 70. But what has changed is that before 2008, most of the Coast Guard ships were operated on extended life. That it was an aging fleet, and because replacement was not coming through quickly, so the life was extended. So now, not only that, we have added numbers, the strength has gone up, all those old ships are replaced. In my understanding, probably there is no Coast Guard ship due for decommissioning as of date. So we can say there's a brand new fleet, expanded fleet with state-of-art technology inducted. So capability building program has really gone off well. And probably, yes, we can respond much better than what we could do then.
Sure. So modernization has been one of the key aspects of Coast Guard's growth. But also, I think Coast Guard has also increased its cooperation with nation states around India's periphery as well as in the extended neighborhood. Tell us a little more about that kind of a cooperation that happens, because drug trafficking and human trafficking is not one nation's problem. It is becoming a problem for Indian Ocean littoral states. There are island states in India's vicinity, and distant long distant illegal fishing, which you mentioned in the beginning. All this entails that there has to be more cooperation between different coast guards of different countries. How does that work?
Yes, as I mentioned on the issue of drug trafficking, definitely there is a close cooperation with Sri Lanka and also Maldives, and we are able to curb and really get after the drug traffickers in this area because of the cooperation. Where we have missed out on the boats of their escape, they have been caught on the other side. So that has worked very well. But on international cooperation part, as I said, those capability building and induction of state-of-art ships. You would have heard recently there was news about Coast Guard laying in the Goa shipyard for 2 pollution control vessels. Now, these 2 pollution control vessels will be added to already existing 3 pollution controls which are there with the Coast Guard. And these vessels are well equipped for major oil spill response operation and can act as a command platform in case of a major tanker crude oil spill. Now, people are probably not familiar, but if there is a major tanker accident or oil spill, it can have devastating consequences, not just to marine environment, but to the economy of the coastal state. And there have been several examples of that. And there is a regulatory mechanism. It's also capability building program. So Coast Guard as a central coordinator for national oil spill disaster has a huge stockpile of equipment located at Mumbai and Chennai for oil spill response. So it's also the combined capability of the equipment available with our oil handling companies and this dedicated pollution control vessels. I can say it is one of the very significant capability, probably the largest in the Indian Ocean region. And there is a regional cooperation program, in fact, sponsored by UNEP, and a regional agreement concluded amongst the countries of South Asia, under which there is a cross-border assistance program. And the significant one, which actually happened, was in September 20. There was a major oil tanker, MT Blue Diamond, which caught fire.
In Sri Lanka, off Colombo.
Yes,
Off Colombo.
And it was carrying 270,000 tons of oil on fire, and assistance of Coast Guard was requested. This dedicated pollution control were rushed in, so also the OPVs and other aircraft assistance. And they fought for 7 days. The fire was fought for 7 days and extinguished. And the Coast Guard role in preventing that disaster was well acknowledged. So I think this is very significant. So also in search and rescue. Our search and rescue region which is the area of responsibility for Coast Guard, is almost 2.5 times the EEZ. That is how big it is. And then it borders several countries in the Indian Ocean. So by virtue of that kind of capability that Coast Guard has, it's a very credible record. I think if anywhere in the seas, any distress alert is raised, it is in auto network. It reaches the respective Coast Guard Rescue Center, and Coast Guard has a system under which Rescue Coordination Center, nearest ship is directed or Coast Guard asset is sent. So we can say anywhere in Indian waters, the rescue is assured if there is a distress alert. So that kind of effective system is there, and which makes us cooperation with the neighboring country. In fact, recently I understand the Coast Guard Maritime Rescue Center is designated as a focal point for SR coordination amongst IORA countries in the Indian Ocean. So that's very significant. Already we have MOUs with the several coast guards of the world. That is Sri Lanka, that is Korean Coast Guard, Japanese Coast Guard. So I think the role of Coast Guard globally is increasing.
It's not only got a vast mandate, it's also got now a very well-developed capability. But before I come to my final question, this one clarification I wanted, or one point of information from you. The drug smuggling or narcotic smuggling that happens mostly in the Arabian Sea and going down towards Lakshadweep and Sri Lanka and Maldives, most of the drugs come from the AFPAC region, the Afghanistan-Pakistan nexus comes in here. Where do the drugs originate?
Very true. And the vessels mostly which are identified associated with the Iranian boats, and we know they do visit Pakistani ports before coming into this area. So that nexus definitely is active, and it is very important to crush it because this drug network is also linked to terror financing. So it has been taken very seriously.
Yes. So my final question to you, since you were at the apex of the Coast Guard organization, one of the key challenges I'm sure you faced, or the Coast Guard still faces, is to get the right manpower and then train them. How did you manage that, or how does Coast Guard manage that? Do you get adequate manpower? What are the ways that you train them, and what is the attraction of the Coast Guard service?
I think Coast Guard has been able to project itself well. It remains in the news. Probably that's the reason that Coast Guard is able to attract very good interest and good response to the Coast Guard advertisement. As far as training is concerned, we've been doing our basic training with Navy, and that is the way we've chosen to do it. And so also the initial sea training, because that is common for Navy and Coast Guard. And thereafter, this training is shifted to Coast Guard Academy, which is temporary academy is in Cochin, but full-fledged academy is the work is in progress in Mangalore. So that is going to be for the specialized Coast Guard roles, whereas the basic training will continue with the Navy. And there are several specialized courses for which Coast Guard officers and sailors go abroad and they get trained, especially with the US Coast Guard and Japan Coast Guard. So training part is well taken care of. And as far as attracting the youth is concerned, I think Coast Guard is fortunate.
It's good to know that, because most people, as I said, seem to be slightly unaware of what Coast Guard does and what Coast Guard can provide to the nation's security. How does it contribute? So, thank you for your time, Vijay. And Coast Guard, of course, should be in the people's consciousness more often than it has been. Thank you for your time and your insights. Coast Guard must be brought to the limelight, and that is why this discussion.
Thank you, Nitin. I'm sure in the years to come, Coast Guard will deliver on its statutory function and live up to its motto, Vayam Rakshama, or we protect.
I'm sure you will. And thank you very much, as I said again, for these insights.
Thank you.
So, viewers, that was ADG Vijay Chafekar, former Coast Guard officer who was at the apex of the organization and giving us the insights about how Coast Guard functions, what is its role, and what Coast Guard can do to protect not only India's vast EEZ, exclusive economic zone in the maritime domain, but also the prevention of smuggling as well as human trafficking. So go and watch this. Do watch. Do keep giving us feedback. You know where to reach us. Our social media handles are all visible. And do keep watching Bharat Shakti's YouTube channel. I'm Nitin Gokhale.